All right. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
How are we doing? Good. Thanks for coming. As you may have seen in some emails, it's First Gen Week. November 8th is officially nationwide National First Gen Day. And so we have a series of events that started last Friday and will continue on throughout most of this week. And I appreciate you coming out today. This is the first time we've done any kind of faculty staff conversation about just how we can best support first generation students. And so I'm excited to see how this goes. Thank you to Jen Harvey and a group of folks that she's worked with that really kind of spearheaded this and provided a lot of the motivation behind getting this going. So thank you to her for that. You'll see microphones in front of all of us. That is for recording. So you might not hear us coming out of the speakers above. So if you can't hear us, feel free to let us know. The microphones, like I said, are going to help us for the recording purposes. So with that, I've got a little bit of information I'm going to share to kind of set the table for the conversation. I'm going to let the panel members introduce themselves, and then we've got a series of questions to talk through, and then at some point, if there's opportunities for the audience to engage, we're happy to do that as well. So to begin with, I will say that I have a hard time sometimes when we talk about just a group of people as if they're all the same. And so we're talking about first generation students as a whole, but just know that every first generation student is their own person. And so they might not all fit into the same box as the things that we discussed today. And also know that the things we discussed today may apply to the ways that you support students that aren't first gen as well. And so I like to think that as we talk about supporting first generation students, it's just really best practices for how we can work with students in general. So I just wanted to start with that. At UNK, the way we define first generation is that neither parent has graduated with a bachelor's degree from a four-year institution. Typically around 40%, usually a little bit more than 40% of our undergraduate student population it falls into that first generation category. And so it's a significant portion of our student body for sure. I want to quickly go over just some national trends with first generation students. And I know that's probably hard to see, so I'll go through it. Basically, what that slide is showing is that first generation students, again, national average, participate less or take advantage of certain resources at a lower rate than non-first generation students. And so we're looking at using services like student health, 29% to 14%. Academic advising, 72% to 55%. Support services like tutoring and success coaching, 37% to 30%. You see the student there in their backpack, and all those circles have different campus resources on them. And the typical experience for a student, the way they experience, especially in their first year, is they need to kind of weave around and find the service that meets their needs. So they know they have a problem. They know there's a bunch of good resources on campus that can help them, but find their way to that right person. Sometimes that means they stop by multiple offices and get referred before they eventually get to the right place, unless they quit trying before they get to the right place because they've stopped at too many. What we'd like the experience to be like is more like this, where the student is in the center. You'll see the yellow circle around the student that says validating agent. So that could be any one of us. And what we do is we make the student feel as though the resources and the services are basically all around them. And so we can be that connection point. So instead of weaving their way through the maze, a person on campus, like I said, could be any one of us, is that connection point to get the student where they need to be. And we do that through building relationships with students, through assisting them with navigating their way through the higher education experience. And so again, that I just wanted to kind of set the stage for what we're going to be discussing today. And now I will go ahead and let the members of the panel introduce themselves, starting on that end and working this way.
Hey, Rashawn Harvey with the TRIO Student Support Services Program. We have a federal grant that works with students here at UNK. Our grant is funded to serve 206 students, and our role is to help those students navigate the higher academic system so they can earn a college degree.
I'm Julie Campbell. I'm a professor with the Department of Criminal Justice, and I'm also the faculty coordinator for the Thompson Scholar Learning Community. In any given year, we have about 435 to 450 scholars on campus.
My name is Juana Perez. I'm a junior here at UNK, and I'm an undergrad assistant for Thompson Scholars.
I'm Krista Majaka. I'm the Senior Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs here at UNK. I'm also a first-generation college student.
Awesome. And we'll go ahead and start with you, Dr. Majaka. If you would like to respond, and also I've said this before, but any panel members, I'm asking one person the question. You're all welcome to chime in too. But Dr. Majaka, if you want to start with, how does the first-gen population, both students, faculty, and staff, enrich the campus community at UNK?
So I did have a moment to prepare, so I knew this was coming up, and I really can only talk from my place, both as a faculty member and as a first-generation college student. The first thing that came to my mind was we enrich any first-generation college student enriches a relationship by their work ethic and their approach to education. So most first-generation college students are still working or have worked their way into college, meaning they've saved up for their own college experience or are taking out those loans. And they have parents that have probably pushed them and said something similar to what my mother said to me. And that is, I want you to work I want you to have a college degree so you can work somewhere where there's air conditioning. Like, her family came from the factories and she worked in a difficult environment. And they knew that a college degree had, pretty much guaranteed that I would have a higher earning potential than she did. So there's a work ethic and kind of a learning from either mistakes or hardships or failures that profile brings to any given relationship. I know I myself was really quite motivated. Again, my mother, and my father had a 10th grade education before he quit school. My mother ended up going to college at the same time that I was one of 7. So she went to college at the same time that we did. So we started before her, but when she then went to college, she then was also a first-generation college student. So we were first-generation college students together, which was kind of a unique situation. But there was a motivation that I wanted to prove the people wrong that said that I was only going to be one of 3 or 4 things, and none of those required a college degree. And then the last thing that came to my mind was a different approach to intellectual curiosity. So I didn't have any preconceived notions of what it meant to be an intellectual or to ask questions. And I would sit in the classroom and just take a whole bunch of notes, and then I would ask what might have sounded like stupid questions at the time, but ended up being really important key entry points into research opportunities.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, Juana. What has it been like for you to come to a 4-year institution as a first-generation student? And what were your biggest fears coming in, and what are maybe some obstacles that you've encountered?
Yeah, so for the first question, coming to a 4-year institution, it's kind of like mind-blowing, but like scary at the same time, because I feel like a lot of students are kind of pushed to go to community colleges at first, especially if you're first gen, to get your gen eds, and then you can transfer to a 4-year institution. So that was kind of my thought of coming to UNK, especially. My biggest fears were, 1, class sizes. My freshman year, I was in a chem class with like 145 kids, but my classes in high school were like 6 of us per class. So I was like, oh, I'm never going to talk to my professor. I'm not going to sit in the T-zone area. I sat right where I entered the room so I could leave as fast as I could. That was one of them. Another fear, not asking for help or not knowing when to ask for help or who to ask for help. That was another one. And then an obstacle. I think this is for a lot of first gens, not really feeling guilty of like being here because it's not like the normal to come to a 4-year institution and like being away from your family and being like the first ones to, I guess, break a generation. I guess pursuing your education, not knowing if you're supposed to be here or not.
Sure. Thank you for sharing. Mr. Harvey, what is important for faculty and staff to keep in mind about building relationships with first-generation students?
I would say how you respond to them matters, and sharing your background matters. I say that because of this. First generation college student myself, so I came from Stuart, Florida to Kearney, Nebraska, sight unseen. So my folks drove, my mom, my stepmom, my dad, cousin, another relative drove me out from Stuart, Florida to Kearney, Nebraska. So we got here. So my second day here, they're going to leave me because I came here, got an athletic scholarship, play football, and get an education. And so the day they were leaving, we went and said, that's the first time they met the head coach because I never took a recruiting trip to Kearney, Nebraska. And so they're getting ready to leave to drive back to Florida. True statement. They looked at Coach Boroff, looked at Coach Morris, looked at Coach Renner, and said, if he doesn't make it here, don't send him home. Send him straight to the Army. And they walked away. Facts. True story. Well, I knew nobody else here. But I had some professors, along with my coaches and teammates, but the professors helped, in a sense, validate that I could get a college education. One gentleman in particular, I think Dr. Lynn, geography. He would, I remember failed my first test, called me in. I'm thinking, all right, here we go. He's going to tell me to drop the class or whatever. But no, he wanted me to know that I could do this, and he was willing to help me study and learn everything. And so ended up taking a couple classes with him just because of the relationship I built with him. And he would stop me anytime on campus and talk to me and just build me up and let me know that you can do it. Had a couple science professors. One gentleman would always say, see, I had a little mini afro. I wore my pick in my hair. And so every time I walked into class, he would say, Mr. Harvey, I see you have your antenna in today. And so he would joke with me and just make me feel comfortable in class. He would always be there to help me out. So I ended up getting, part of my degree in science and social science, probably because of this gentleman that showed an interest and helped me through the process, and let me know his background also. And just knowing that he was a first generation college student, he had to pay to get through college. He didn't have much support. He went to college away from home. So those things are important. I think the first generation college student, they can hear and see somebody that's going through the same experience that they're going through, and you as a faculty or staff can share that with them. That gives them someone else to connect with here on campus also, and someone they can go to when they're having some challenges, because we all know they're going to have challenges. And I always tell them, don't let pride and ego get in your way. And we all have it, but you got people here on campus that are willing to help you. But us as staff or faculty, that if we can just open up to them a little bit, that's going to draw them in, and that you never know what's going to keep a student here and help them, navigate the higher academic system so they can graduate.
So I hear Juana say one of the challenges is questioning whether you belong. And then what I hear you say is that you had those similar feelings, and then faculty, coaches showed they cared and told you do belong and that you can make it. And so I guess some issues, even way, way back when Rashawn was a student, are the same as they are now, right? But it just shows, I guess, I appreciate all of you for being here, because it shows that maybe you all can be that person that shows the next student that they belong and that they can do it too. So, Dr. Campbell, can you speak a little bit about approaching first generation students from an asset perspective rather than a deficit perspective?
Sure, absolutely. Unfortunately, as a faculty member, most of the time that I'm working with a student one-on-one in my office, it's in some kind of negative context. So they failed an exam, they're missing homework, and it's very easy for that conversation to be overwhelmingly negative and for it to be a negative experience for the students. You're not studying hard enough, you're not coming to class, you're not prepared to be in college. If we can turn that around and focus on the strengths of the student, it can be very transformational for them and for us. And I think that's particularly important to keep in mind for all students. But when you're talking about first generation students, I always have this moment where I realize how much grit they have. And that's an unusual thing to say now because I see a lot of colleagues on campus that work with students every single day. And one of our biggest complaints is lack of grit, lack of toughness, lack of resiliency. But our first gen students, they have something a little bit special. For a lot of students in Nebraska that arrived at UNK this fall, they came to college because that's what you do after you leave high school. You go to college. But that's not what you do if you're a first gen student. You're the first one to have to do this. So they had to figure out a lot just to land in my office to ask a question. They had to figure out how to apply for college. They had to come here and do new student enrollment. They had to fill out a FAFSA. They had to get textbooks online. They had to walk into a classroom on a campus they may never have been to. And then they had to work up the courage to come and sit and talk to me in my office. So that tells me that that student does have a lot of assets. They have determination, they have grit, and somewhere along the way, they made the decision that they're worth it. They deserve to be here, they deserve a college education. I just have to remind them that they came here for those reasons, and then I can give them the tools they need to unlock whatever it is in class that's not coming together. That's the easy part for me because I'm a teacher, that's my job. That's what I'm supposed to do is unlock it for my students. But when we can turn it around and make it a positive experience, then I think our students are more likely to engage, to feel empowered, to be successful, and then to come back and finish and walk across the stage and graduate, which is the ultimate goal, right? So we just need to remember what their strengths are, and they're all bringing those strengths with them, particularly our first gen trailblazers.
Awesome. Thank you. Juana, I'm back to you. From your perspective, what would it be helpful for faculty, staff, and advisors to be mindful of as they support first-generation students?
Little backstory. I didn't know what like the LOPER 1 meant or the LOPER 2 or I didn't know like the categories that they meant. And my advisor, my freshman year, she wasn't the best, but she doesn't work anymore, so it's okay. She just didn't explain anything to me, so I kind of had to like figure it out. I would ask my siblings, but they came here a long time ago, so universities change constantly. So one thing is when a student walks into your office for the first time, I guess this goes for advisors, kind of sitting down with them and explaining it okay, you need to do this first, or you can take these with like, if you have a major, you can mix them up a little bit. So that's one thing. They're probably going to hide from professors like I did. I did not want to talk to my professors at all. I've gotten a lot better though. Obviously, I've been here for 3 years. I kind of have to communicate with them. So I guess just noticing like who's kind of more distant, who doesn't look as comfortable in the classroom, like me running out right when class ended. That was another one. Like Dr. Campbell said, just we have a grit here. We want to do good. So even if we fail the first 3 exams, we're going to try to not drop the class because we need it. And I know a lot of advisors would be like, no, drop the class. And we're like, but what if that puts me behind because I only have 4 years here, so, yeah.
I appreciate what you said about noticing the student that looks uncomfortable. I've taught classes before. It's not my profession, but I can picture myself if I saw a student just leaving class right away. There might be this little thing in my gut to say, well, that student really isn't interested and they just want to get out of here. And that would be a misinterpretation in most cases, probably. And so keeping that front of mind is important, I think. So thank you. Next question is for Dr. Majaka and Dr. Campbell. If you both want to share any perspective about specifically what you might do to help a first-generation student in the classroom setting. Either one of you can start.
Sure, go ahead.
Oh, I'll go first. Okay. I think there are a couple of things you can do to engage first-generation students in the classroom. I think one of the things you can do is to provide some context. So I'm teaching Introduction to Criminal Justice right now as a general studies course, which means I have no majors in my class. I have students who are going to be teachers, and they're going to be scientists, and they're going to go into the helping professions and the health sciences. I think for them to fully engage, it's important that I relay to them why this information is important to them and how it fits in with their lives. How do they access it? How do they connect with it? I think that's the first piece. And then the second piece is, and Juana's talked about this a little bit, it's noticing the students in your classroom and welcoming them into the conversation. So I do know who the students are that run out the door at the first moment that they are able to. I do notice who's likely to sit back and observe, and inviting them to engage in that conversation and bring in their perspective, I think, can really validate the importance of their perspective and give them an opportunity in a safe spot to kind of begin to engage with the college experience.
Yeah, I'll add to that by saying that in order to do that, in order to open up that conversation with a student, as a faculty member myself, I had to drop the assumptions that I had about why students were doing the things that they were doing. I had a student that sat in the back of the class and he fell asleep. It was a 9 a.m. class, which I think is not early at all, but 9 a.m. is pretty early for a student who's working a job. And he would just kind of nod off. And, you know, he was playing a sport. And I just assumed he wasn't the least bit interested in the class, didn't bother to stay awake. I'm the first gen myself. And when I said something to the coach, I'm very careful now what I say to coaches, because like this kid like never fell asleep again. I was like, oh man, like sick to the coach on this poor kid. But what I found out was that he was getting up at like 4 a.m. in order to get his homework done, to go to his job, and then to be able to practice and then come to class. Like he was up way before I was. That was an assumption that I made. So in order to have that conversation, I have to drop those assumptions I have about why first-gen students are doing what they're doing. Just like Juana said, you know, same way, a T-zone, I love that. Like, you know, I would just make sure I was on the end so I could scoot out as quickly as possible. You know, as a faculty member, I might make the assumption that student is just not interested in class or isn't interested in learning more. Meanwhile, you know, I didn't know how to talk to people. I didn't know how to have the same. I mean, there were 6 months went by when I started college. People were using words. I thought I had a pretty good vocabulary. Words that I had no idea what they were saying. I would just write them in the margins. Like, what are they? Subject? What the heck does that word mean? I just write it in the margin and go back and look in my dictionary. Like, it wasn't because I wasn't interested. I just didn't have any clue what anybody was saying. So as an educator, I think that's really important to not make assumptions so that conversation can take place.
Thank you. Drop the assumptions, get to know students, let the students get to know you. Those are themes that I feel like are coming up. So, Rashawn, can you share specifically from your perspective what you might do to help a first-generation student in an advising session?
Well, I'll take from the approach of first semester freshman this semester. And this may not 100% apply to just first gen. This might be for any student. If you're not familiar with how NSC works, your students that may be a first semester freshman that's coming in to meet with their primary advisor, they may have the assumption that it's going to be just like NSC. Well, NSC advising isn't like their advising meeting. So, like in my course now, LMSK 103 University, Foundations for Learning, I call it University Foundations for Bad. Foundations for Learning. So, Pat, last week we talked about your advising session that it's not going to be just like NSC. Well, NSC, our goal is, there's certain reasons they're here for NSC. We basically help organize their classes on a scheduling grid. We walk them down to a different room where NSC leaders help them enroll for the classes. And so they may come into your advising session thinking that's the way it's going to be. And they may not come in prepared. They're just coming in thinking, all right, they're just going to tell me what to take or give me suggestions what to take, just like NSC. And so I would highly suggest taking some time and say, hey, this is not going to be like your NSC experience right now. I may not sit down with you and put classes in your shopping cart for you. I may not organize them in the time grid for you, but here's what I will do. I will go through the course and explain to you why you need to take these courses. That's one of the biggest things I don't think they understand. They just walk in, get some classes, and they don't know. Let me take that back. Be careful how I say it. You may have told them why they're taking it, but they didn't walk out of there with an understanding of why they need to take these classes. So I think kind of emphasizing why you need to take these courses, like any of us probably, why am I taking all these general studies classes, right? Anybody had that same thought when you were a grad too? But explaining them the importance of these general studies courses, or just like when you're meeting with them, you may have your courses for your program, and you may have them in a particular order, first semester, second semester, or suggestions. But sometimes I think they have that sheet and they think that's the way I have to follow it. That's the way it's going to be, but it may not be that way. I don't think they understand sometimes that all these may not all be offered each semester. So taking some time and explaining that to them. Also explaining to them, yeah, we want you to take 15 credit hours so you can get done in 4 years. But when you go to register, the 15 that you want to take may not all be there. Have a plan to go in with 18 in case one of these isn't available. So you can change that on your schedule. And helping them understand what prerequisites are. Again, I know you got a set amount of time, but if you kind of hit on somebody, what's a prerequisite? What's a co-requisite if I have to take this course? Even showing them where the undergraduate catalog is on the UNK website is important, because some of them have no idea what that is, the importance of it. Or even pulling up their degree audit. Again, you're not going to have time to go through every bit of it, but hitting on certain aspects of the degree audit. What are all these lopers? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? So hitting on all those. Hey, you have to take one class from each of these. Some of these may be, one of these in this area might be required for your major. Let's identify 1 or 2 that's required in Loper 6 for your major. So I think some of those I call them basic things might be important for them, so they have an understanding of the process of why advising is important. What am I going to get out of it? How can I apply it to the next semester? And what we find out in our program, that some students that have friends that aren't in our TRIO program, some of them have no idea how this process works. And so even educating that student enough that you're meeting with so they can go explain it to someone else is going to impact not just that student, but the whole UNK community, help us retain more students.
Thank you. Juana, back to you. What resources and supports at UNK have been particularly helpful to you as a first-generation student?
This is an easy answer. Well, I'm a Thompson Scholar, so I work with these folks over here, amazing people. So I got the opportunity to settle here, and then they just have this whole program set up for you to expose you to other things on campus, and they support you through all of it. And I'm also an OD scholar, so going through the OD office, they support you as well. I think my freshman year I had like 5 different advisors. So I was like, oh, who do I talk to? Who's this? Who's that? So those two were probably my top because in both offices they have first gens, of course, that have like Hunter and Elise, they were Thompson Scholars, first gens. Jen's first gen. There's a lot of first gens here. Louise is first gen in the OD office, so they just understand what you kind of come here with, and so I'm pretty lucky.
Yeah. Would you say it's true that they didn't necessarily always have all the answers, but they knew who to connect you to?
Yes.
You came for a certain reason,
Yes.
right?
100%.
So it kind of goes back to that last slide where the students in the middle and all the supports are on the outside. Well, she didn't have to always know where to go. She just knew she had this point person that she could go to, and that person would know what to do. And again, each one of us in this room can be that person for any number of students that come here. So, Dr. Campbell, can you share a little bit about the concept of validation and how we can use it at UNK? Maybe provide the Thompson context for that if you'd like. Yeah.
As Aaron mentioned at the beginning of our time together this afternoon, the Thompson Scholar Learning Community has been researched for about the last 10 years by our colleagues from the University of Southern California Pulliam Center. And they really were kind of interested in exploring the secret sauce of the Thompson Scholar Learning Community. What is making this program successful? And I won't go into a lot of backstory because all of you are here on campus and you know what our Thompson Scholars are, but they are students who are generously gifted with financial support from the Thompson Buffett Foundation for 5 years of college. And in addition to that financial support, they get the support of the learning community. So the staff and the faculty that come alongside and help them navigate the transition to college and then the process to graduation. So the researchers kind of wanted to know, what is it about this that makes students more likely to come back or more likely to graduate? And the secret sauce turned out to be validation. So students who believe that they belong at UNK and that they matter to people at UNK are more likely to graduate. And we make people feel like they belong and they matter when we validate them. And validation isn't saying, you did a great job and you're so smart, here's your gold star. Validation is not sunshine being wafted at students and empty praise. Validation is, I see you and I care about you and you belong here and I want to help you figure this out. And I feel a little silly explaining that to this particular room full of people because this is a room full of people who do this every single day and do it so well. This is a room full of people who turn away from their email and look at the student sitting in front of them and say, well, let's talk about it. What's going on? What are the challenges? Where are we struggling? How can we help? What are the resources? And those connections, those moments when a student feels like, wow, you know who they are, you know their name, they really matter, are so powerful. Unfortunately, a lot of first generation students do worry about imposter syndrome. I'm not sure I belong here. I'm not sure I'm supposed to be here. No one else did this. I might have made a huge mistake. So when you have that moment to say to a student, I see your strengths and you matter and I care about you, that can be really transformational. So I think validation is incredibly important and it's so easy to do for any of us and for all of us. It doesn't take very long. It just takes our undivided attention for a few moments when we're connecting with students to let them know that they're seen and that we're glad they're here at UNK and that we're here to help them.
So it's sort of like Rashawn's example where
Yes.
that professor didn't bring him into his office and say, hey, you did a really good job on the first test. Keep it up the good work. He said, I believe in you. I believe you can do better, and I'm here to help you. And again, how did that make you feel as a guy who was far from home and didn't know anybody?
Someone cared about me and wanted me to be successful.
Right. Dr. Majaka, back to you. Why do you feel like we need to do the work that's necessary to support and ultimately retain first-generation students at UNK?
So I thought pretty deeply about this question, and I have kind of two parts to why I think it matters. Well, I mean, I know why it matters. We know why it matters. Like Dr. Campbell said, that's why we're here, because like this is the choir. Like we're preaching to the choir. But I think it's important to understand, like when I think about this question, I think, why do some people not focus and care? Well, I think the expectation for what it means to be a teacher needs to be really clear. You know, teacher just doesn't impart knowledge. Like we don't just unscrew the top of the head, dump the information in, and then put the top of the skull back, and there, you've got it. Here's your syllabus, here's your book, read it, here's your test. Like that's not what teaching is about. Teaching sometimes means that I have to pull, I not just only have to pull students into my world, but most of the time I have to go down into their world and figure out how to use examples or methods that help them understand. So I think it's good teaching. I think if we're not making an attempt to reach our students where they are, then we're not teaching them. And as faculty, we have an obligation to teach our students. So I think it is the only way to teach, and that is to figure out why doesn't that student understand? And students have an obligation too to ask questions and to use tutoring services and to do their homework. But at the same time, as a faculty member, I got to figure out, why doesn't that student understand? How do I go into their world? I mean, sometimes I've had to use words that I never used before, like, or understand what they're saying. Like, instead of saying like, oh, that's really cool, students be like, oh, that's really sick. Like the first time I heard that, I'm like, something's wrong. Like somebody's not feeling well. Like there's like an infectious issue here. And like, no, I really, I have to be okay with the way language changes. And that can be hard for somebody that's older, to hear new words that don't make sense to me. Like I have to get outside of my comfort zone. And I'll just end with this. Why do we need to retain our first generation college students? Because it's a right in our country. There's an expectation, there's a promise. Our federal government has made a promise that there will be equal access to education. And that means that as a teacher, and now as an administrator, that I have to honor that right and figure out what is different between what I know and what I think is the way somebody should learn and how that person needs to learn. We have an obligation to fulfill that promise that our federal government has made. And that is through federal loans, Pell Grants. First generation college students get Pell Grants. Most of us get Pell Grants. We have an obligation to enact that right and to make sure our students have equal access.
Thank you. Rashawn, one more for you. What strengths from your perspective do you believe first generation students bring to UNK?
I think it's been said several times: grit, resiliency, and then I steal this from I can't remember the name of the movie, but I know Clint Eastwood is in it. But ability to improvise, adapt, and overcome. To improvise, adapt, and overcome. Because a lot of first generation college students, you get here, and I don't know if I can make it, so we kind of in a sense, you fake it till you make it. And so that's really the improvise, adapt to the situation, and you figure out how to overcome that situation. And so just my opinion, we're working with first generation college students and people in general. We all have something that we're battling along this journey to earn that college degree. And sometimes we got to dig into those students and figure out what that is going into their world, and figure out how we can make some statements or words of wisdom to help them continue to show that grit and be resilient. Because there's been many students that had in my office and they want to go back home, or this is happening. But sometimes they, like Dr. Majaka said, you got to get into the world. I have no problem, right or wrong. Some people won't do this, but I'm okay with it, because the ultimate goal for me is to help them earn a college degree. And say, okay, what are you going to do? Go back home and do what? Go back home and do what? You're either going to prove people right, or you're going to prove them wrong. And I'll tell them, there are people here that say, we let them in, or they're not going to make it. you either prove them right or you prove them wrong. So there, I'm challenging them. What are you gonna do? What do you want? Do you want to change the direction of your family, your future family down the road? What are you gonna do? Let's make a decision. Get into their world sometimes. You gotta talk their language, right or wrong. You'll get to them that way, and some students will open up to you more when you start doing that. Especially if you have that similar background to them. That's why I think it's important. You are a first generation staff member, faculty, anybody, tell them. Because now they have somebody else they can identify on this campus that has a similar background to them. Somebody I can go to if I got a question about something. Someone that's going to tell me the truth. And I think that's an art sometimes we're not giving the students the truth. Tell them the truth. It's going to be a battle sometimes. But what do you want long term? What's your goal? Did you come here just to have fun, or did you come here to get a degree? How's it going to impact your family if you don't be successful? Sometimes it might be unfair, but sometimes they need to hear it. Sorry, I got on my soapbox.
No, and I would say that's a great soapbox. And I would say that the reason you're able to challenge them is because you've laid the foundation with that relationship to begin with, right? So you got to know them, let them get to know you, and now you can challenge them in that way without having them turn their ears off. So, thank you. Last question is for you, Juana. What is it about UNK that helps you and other first-generation students feel a sense of belonging?
I think for a lot of students, or for people that I know, their professors show that they care, and their advisors show that they care. So that's like a big one for a lot of people. And then their first connections that they make keep trying to push them to make further connections with other people on campus or like outside resources. But for me, I think it started from the start. Like Ashley, she was my the recruiter at the time, and she was like working with admissions, and so that first phase of like UNK just felt like I could come here and be here with other students, and then I would just say like faculty and staff on campus just really like care. So I always brag about this institution because people care. I make my friends transfer here.
Appreciate that.
And they see it for themselves too. They're like, oh, like my professors are so nice compared to like where I came from. They care about you here, and I'm like, thank you. That's why I made you come here, because people care about you here. So yeah.
That's awesome. Anyone else have any other final thoughts before we wrap it up? If not, can we give a round of applause to the panel members? Thank you all. Thank you all very much. We do have a few minutes. Are there any questions from anybody out in the audience that you'd like the members of the panel, and I say members of the panel because I'm over here, that you'd like them to address, so I'll address too?
I'll ask one.
Sure.
Do you feel, is it uncomfortable, maybe a student can ask this or the rest of you as well, is it uncomfortable trying to ask students more personal questions, like when you see someone sleeping in class or you have concerns about a student? Is that a hard conversation to get into? How do you find students react when you start digging a little bit?
I think depends on the relationship you have established with that student. Here's an example. Last fall, so teaching my course, student of mine in the class, he traditionally gets up, leaves at a certain time, goes to the restroom, whatever. So one particular day, we're working on something. He goes to the restroom. Like 5 minutes later, I need to go to the restroom, so I go to the restroom. I walk in the restroom. He is sitting on the counter, feet crossed, phone just in there, texting, searching away on his phone. And so I look at him, like, I didn't really come here to check on you. I really came here to use the restroom. So he came back. So later on, I called him at the class. I was like, I was just, so you gonna tell me why you were wasting time? But I had that relationship to say to him, why are you in there doing that, wasting time when you needed to be working on this research project, but you're in here texting? So me, I don't have a problem with it. Either they're gonna like me or not like me. Do it, but they know I'm doing it because I care about them. Because day one in class, I tell them my responsibility to help you navigate our academic system so you can earn a college degree. And I'm gonna say things that you like and some things that you don't like. And I'm okay with that because one day you'll appreciate why I did so.
I know for me, it was important to make sure that I honored where the student was at. So when I made that mistake by going right to the coach and saying, hey, one of your athletes is falling asleep in my class, what's going on? The other option was not for me to go up to the student in the middle of class and embarrass them. Like I learned, I talked to people, what would you do? How do you handle this? And somebody told me early on, like, a student between the ages of 18 and 22, like the most important thing to them in that moment is like what their friends think of them. And I'm like, okay, so if I embarrass that student intentionally, like, hey, you always hear those stories, right? The slamming of the book or the intentional calling out to, oh, that student will never do that again. Well, then you lose an opportunity to reach that student and establish trust. What matters most to them is what they're, but never embarrass a student in class. Always like an email later or a conversation later. And that helps to build that trust. Like I really do care about what they're going through. And I find out why.
I was a little nervous about it when I started that practice of approaching students and asking them, so what's going on? And I think maybe the second time I tried it with the second student, the student actually said, thank you, Dr. Campbell. Thank you for noticing I haven't been coming to your class and caring enough to ask. And I was like, yes, it's my regular practice. So I do it all the time. But I was very touched that the student was touched. I was touched. They were touched that I cared enough to ask. I wasn't expecting that to be the response. So I haven't found that you really need to, interrogate students, put a spotlight in their face. Most of them will tell you what they're comfortable sharing, and that's enough for you to start to build a relationship. And it's usually enough, even if you don't know all the details, for you to be able to offer some kind of assistance. Even if you can't personally offer it, one of your colleagues on campus who can.
Yeah, for me, I have a professor right now. She does this with every class, but she sends out like a Google Doc, like on the first day of class, just, are you this? Are you this? Just asking some questions. And then her last question is always like, is there an obstacle that might impact you during the school year, during the semester, or right now? So I think that's like a good time for her to even set like a distant relationship with the student, and then maybe approaching the student if they're not coming to class or something. I like how she does that.
That's awesome. I'll say, like, for me, if you know my personality, I'm probably always uncomfortable when I approach that kind of conversation. But even when the conversation didn't necessarily go well, I'm glad that we had it. You know what I mean? So for me, it's like, okay, I got to just do this. Here we go. But it's always good, even when it's maybe not great in that moment, So, other questions? All right. If not, they get a round of applause again, just because. Thank you all, and thank you for the audio visual as well. Appreciate it. And Wednesday at 2:30, right out there in the food court area, is the First Gen Day celebration. So you came to the educational discussion. Come on Wednesday and get a T-shirt and some ice cream, and let the students who are there feel the support from faculty and staff as well. So I hope you're able to come out then as well. So thank you all. Yeah. Oh, another round of applause.